The following program may contain coarse language and scenes that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
On this edition of The Fifth Estate.
And I do believe it's a miscarriage of justice in the hands of the Crown prosecutors and the police.
For decades in Winnipeg, Peter Nygard was untouchable.
Society thinks, oh, Peter Nygard perfected everything in the Bahamas. No, he perfected how to get away with all of this in Winnipeg.
Police and prosecutors there, unable to make rape charges stick.
Our investigation was finished. Mr. Nygard was deemed to be innocent.
This is where Peter Nygard picked me up.
Today, in the city where Peter Nygard built his fashion empire, his accusers are still waiting for justice.
It's hard to be here.
I'm Bob McKeown. There was a time when Peter Nygard was the pride of Winnipeg. Rich, famous, a fashion billionaire. Now he's in jail, facing charges of sexual assault and sex trafficking in Toronto and New York. But for all the rumors and the allegations, Peter Nygard has never been prosecuted in his hometown, here in Winnipeg. And the women who've come forward want to know why. This is The Fifth Estate.
10 women have launched a class action lawsuit against Canadian clothing manufacturer Peter Nygard.
Under investigation for rape.
A number of women claim they were victims of what they call a sex trafficking ring.
What triggered Peter Nygard's downfall was a class action lawsuit filed in New York in February 2020. For decades, Nygard had seemed unusually well insulated against such allegations. But now 125 women have joined that American civil suit, including 60 Canadians, claiming damages for sexual assault. And for the first time in a long time, women from Winnipeg put their trust in the police and came forward to tell their stories.
I don't have a lot of faith in them already, only because of the fact that so many Indigenous peoples are failed by them, me included.
For Serena Hicks, it began in 1992, when she was 20, a new mother working part-time at one of Peter Nygard's stores in Winnipeg. It's where she first met him, and soon, she says, where he raped her, which she kept to herself for years.
I just let this out July last year. I'm not near feeling like a survivor yet. I am very much in victim still. That's a hard way to wake up every day.
It took a lot for me to go to the police because they were the ones that were criminalizing me for it for years.
Nadine Mustos was just 14 when she says she first got into Peter Nygard's car in the notorious Winnipeg sex trafficking district known as Kitty Track. She says before long he raped her. It would be a secret she also kept for years before telling the police.
It was nerve-wracking. I felt like having a seizure before I went there because I know what I had to talk about.
I reached out to the Winnipeg police and had, I think, 2, maybe 3 lengthy discussions on the phone. And then Detective Shuchuk flew out to Vancouver to interview me and my mother on camera. And I thought, oh my goodness, stuff is gonna happen. Finally, it's gonna happen.
Wearing Nygard clothing that was sent to me.
April Telek says she was raped by Nygard in 1993 after he invited her to Winnipeg for a modeling job. It was about 3 decades later when she finally described everything that happened to the Winnipeg police.
It felt really good to go on the record officially and go after him criminally.
I phoned the Winnipeg cop shop and said, I'm coming in and I'm pressing charges.
The wait was even longer for Casey Allen, just 17 in 1979, soon to be a successful model. She says Peter Nygard raped her after they met at a local nightclub. 4 decades later, her experience with the Winnipeg police did not inspire confidence.
It would have been possibly 6 to 7, 8 months without hearing anything. So you flay your soul in front of strangers and they hold that in their hands and you put it out there and nothing comes back.
Serena Hicks, Nadine Mustos, April Telek, and Casey Allen are 4 of the 8 cases involving Peter Nygard, which Winnipeg police told us they tried to move towards prosecution in the past year. But while those women would wait and wonder what, if anything, Manitoba justice would do, American law enforcement was soon in high gear. Just days after the first 10 women sued Peter Nygard, an FBI raid in New York.
The FBI and the NYPD descended on the Times Square offices as part of the criminal investigation into allegations of sex trafficking.
Before long, Nygard stepped down from his own company, his lawyers still claiming he's the victim.
The allegations are completely false. They'll be vigorously defended. They are part of a vicious and malicious conspiracy which has been going on for about 10 years against Nygard by his enemies.
We have some breaking news for you. Canadian fashion mogul Peter Nygard has been arrested. Reports say Nygard was
10 months after those FBI raids, Peter Nygard finally was arrested in Winnipeg, though on a U.S. warrant, not on Canadian charges.
Following a request from the U.S. Justice Department to begin extradition proceedings to
West. He's been indicted in the Southern District of New York on multiple charges of sex trafficking minors and racketeering.
The catalyst for that legal action wasn't allegations from Winnipeg, but from thousands of kilometers away in the Bahamas at Nygard Key. Peter Nygard's name has been recognized here in the Bahamas for years, but arguably never more so than right now, with all the headlines about rape allegations and lawsuits. We're on our way to a private location to meet with the women behind those claims.
It was me, my sister, and my cousin. We're inside the mall on a Saturday, and then we end up passing Nygard Slim store.
In the U.S. class action lawsuit, she's called Jane Doe number 1, among the first to come forward and speak about her experience with Nygard. Just graduated from grade 9, she was shopping for pants at the Nygard store in the Bahamas.
Nygard came, took my measurements because he said he wanted to make sure all his customers have something that could fit them. Then we went to the front and took pictures.
This is Peter Nygard himself.
Yes.
Did you know who Peter Nygard was then?
Yeah, I know he had a key in the Bahamas, Nygard Key.
And you knew he had a fashion
He had a store
company.
name after him.
What she says happened next is now a familiar plot here.
He asked me about the modeling, and then this lady came and took my number.
Did you in fact hear from her?
3 days later, she told me she was coming to pick me up and what time to be ready for.
You're being picked up at your home and taken to Nygard Key?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had dinner. I still thought we were going to have this discussion about the modeling.
And did he in fact mention that?
No. But after he told me, let's go somewhere quiet so we discuss business.
Where did you go?
To his bedroom.
In the class action suit, Jane Doe number 1 alleges Nygard raped her at Nygard Key, a story that echoes the experiences of women in Winnipeg decades earlier.
This was by far the most sinister, the most pervasive, the most perverse, and the most violent of all of the trafficking endeavors I've seen.
Lisa Haba is one of the attorneys behind the U.S. class action suit against Nygard.
He picked the Bahamas, right? What ends up happening is he can operate in plain sight, and the government of the Bahamas gave him a sanctuary within which to operate a criminal sex trafficking ring.
But for decades, Winnipeg was Nygard's sanctuary too, where he enjoyed the support of prominent Canadian politicians and business people. Where stories of sexual assault were whispered perhaps, but never spoken in a courtroom. After the break, it happened in Winnipeg over 50 years ago.
Herb and I received a report from a young lady of a sexual nature, and we investigated the offense.
Was that the start of Peter Nygard's twisted tale? When we come back. Winnipeg in the 1960s.
For the next 30 minutes, it's the hit music of the day, the songs from the top of the charts, the sounds of now. Flashback to summer 67, salute the mamas and papas, and dig a brand new record release headed for the top. Let's go!
In 1960, I was transferred to at that time it was the detective division, later changed to the crime division.
50 years ago, Des DePork was a Winnipeg police officer. His partner, Herb Stephen, would go on to be police chief. But being a detective was what Des wanted to do.
I never came out of there. I spent the next 25 years in the crime division.
By the late 60s, Peter Nygard was in his 20s, already on the way to building an international fashion empire right there in Winnipeg.
I knew very little about him. I only knew what I'd read in the papers, and he was getting a lot of publicity about his rise to fame.
But what you're about to hear has never been reported before. Des DePork says in 1968 he and his partner investigated a criminal complaint against Nygard.
Herb and I received a report from a young lady of a sexual nature, and we investigated the offense. As a result of the investigation, Mr. Nygard was charged with a sexual offense.
It was half a century ago, and Des is now 89. But telling it publicly for the first time, he still recalls what happened next.
My recollection is he was a young lady, somewhere, I'm guessing, around 18, maybe a little older, and I believe she worked for Mr. Nygard in his factory.
They took her statement and put Nygard under arrest, charged with a sexual offense. The case was referred to the Manitoba Crown for prosecution, the first such event we could find for Peter Nygard. But then, suddenly, Detective DePork says, the woman withdrew her complaint.
As a result of that, our investigation was finished because no plea was entered. There was no convictions. Mr. Nygard was deemed to be innocent. And as a result of that, that was the end of that.
That same scenario would repeat itself in 1980, when Nygard was charged with rape. This time, the story made headlines. But once again, the complainant refused to testify, and the charge was dropped. A few years after that, another woman, a Nygard employee, went to the Winnipeg police to complain about being sexually harassed by him at work. She contacted a police officer she knew and says she was told unequivocally that they couldn't protect her from him. She says what happened next would shatter her life.
Oh, the harassment was just, it's sexualizing everything, Sexualizing conversation, sexualizing words.
She was 18 in 1983 when she got the job with Nygard. She's never spoken publicly about it before, and we've agreed to protect her identity. She says at work, Nygard sexually harassed her, constantly.
I was kept working very, very late, and I was very well aware of the fact that there were no more buses running.
Late one night, Nygard offered to drive her home.
I was still living with my parents. That's how young I was. And he wanted, it was, you can be my girlfriend, you're sexy. Ugh. And I just got the heck out of that car really quickly and ran into the house.
She says when the harassment persisted, she arranged to meet again with the Winnipeg detective, who told her to do whatever she could to get away from Nygard.
He informed me at that dinner that he had had a look into Peter Nygard's file. the things that he had access to. And he said that his file is 10.5 inches high. Nothing sticks to this man. I don't know what's happening. You have to get out of there. But I thought I could handle it. I loved my job.
The detective told her to quit, and she gave her notice. But before her last day, she says Nygard insisted she accompany him to a fashion show. He said he just had to stop at his apartment first. Once there, she says, he raped her.
I couldn't report after something had happened for real. I was too scared to say anything. I felt so ashamed that I had to quit.
By the 1990s, Peter Nygard was one of Winnipeg's most prominent business figures, seemingly untouchable. That is, until 1996, when the Winnipeg Free Press reported that 3 of his former female employees had launched sexual harassment complaints with the Manitoba Human Rights Commission. That story produced a number of tips from other women, which led to a former Nygard employee from Denmark named Jonna Larsson. She told a Winnipeg Free Press reporter that in 1980, Nygard invited her on a business trip to Asia, where he apparently had the adjacent room.
There was somebody in my bed. And I woke up and I saw it was Nygard, and I was about to say something, and he put his hand over my mouth. He said, "Oh, just don't worry, you're a nice girl, and I'm not going to hurt you." And yeah, but he raped me.
So the Winnipeg Free Press had a genuine scoop, an exclusive interview about the dark side of the pride of Winnipeg, Peter Nygard. But the Free Press, Winnipeg's paper of record, refused to print the story. The newspaper's publisher in 1996 was Rudy Redekop, who says he got pressure from business leaders in Winnipeg, people he calls Nygard's compatriots and Winnipeg kingpins. He says he was worried the reporting might be sensationalist. What's more, Peter Nygard threatened a lawsuit, and the story was killed. Today, former publisher Rudy Redekop says that was a different time, and he now admits maybe we should have proceeded with the Nygard story. As for Jonna Larsson, she eventually went home to Denmark, where she told the story of what had happened years earlier to the Fifth Estate.
It still affects me.
Is that in part why you're telling this story?
Yes, it is. Like, I don't get anything out of telling my story except maybe a bit more peace inside. It's good having my daughter here as well. I never think that I really told her the details. It's unpleasant, but yet I feel good about her knowing it. I ask myself for some peace and breathing space after all those years.
For decades in Winnipeg, Peter Nygard's accusers have largely stayed in the shadows, the clothing magnate shielded by his money and power.
How could somebody like him go on for 40 years? Police knew about it, media knew about it, everybody knew about it. And yet, because he was wealthy or, a so-called success story, he just rolled through like a knife through butter.
When we come back, the women who've publicly accused Peter Nygard in Winnipeg. And why, after decades of alleged sexual violence, Nygard was arrested and charged in Toronto, not in his hometown.
Yes, good morning, Chief Justice.
Chief Justice, this is an application for an order for committal for extradition brought pursuant to Section 29 of the Extradition Act.
In October 2021, Peter Nygard appeared in court in Winnipeg, though not for trial. He agreed to be extradited for criminal prosecution in the U.S.
Mr. Nygard, just to acknowledge the consent to committal, and I understand that you voluntarily executed it in his presence. Is that correct, Mr. Nygard?
That's correct, yes.
In a converted garage in Toronto, where she counsels dozens of Nygard's alleged victims all over the world, therapist Shannon Moroney watched it unfold.
He looked small and weak and powerless. And it was very powerful for most survivors to see the roles are reversed. You're not small and weak and powerless anymore. He is. Well, you're not the only one who feels like this. You're not alone in this at all.
But Moroney says when she tried to involve a Winnipeg police investigator in the case of one of the women victimized by Nygard, his attitude was dismissive.
I know. And then he wouldn't talk to me anymore. Like I'm a nuisance. That's what I felt like. I'm a nuisance. And also from what I've heard from other survivors that have actually just said to me outright, I will never report to the Winnipeg police. I don't trust them at all.
However, in the past year, a number of women have gone to the police in Winnipeg, alleging sexual assault by Nygard. Winnipeg police declined our request to speak on camera, but they did disclose certain details of their Nygard investigation. They told us that they had examined 15 cases and that they'd referred 8 of them to Manitoba Justice for possible prosecution. We spoke to 4 of those survivors. All of them say they want to see Peter Nygard criminally charged. In the fall of 1979, Winnipeg native Casey Allen was 17, an aspiring model and first-year student at the University of Manitoba. Though under the legal drinking age, a favorite weekend night spot was Bogart's, where she often saw Peter Nygard, then closing in on 40.
Growing up in Winnipeg, Peter Nygard was very much on the radar. He was a big personality. He was hard to miss. And he was known by reputation too, and it wasn't necessarily a very attractive reputation.
Look in your eyes so I can see. Look in your eyes.
You know, he was circling. He was sort of a shark, buying drinks, checking everybody out, and being very unsubtle about it.
She says one night when she went to take a taxi home, Nygard offered her a ride.
I'm not sure at the age of 17 that I was aware he was a predator, but we all knew that he was pushy and bad news.
Supposedly driving her home, Nygard's first stop was the Winnipeg warehouse, where he kept an apartment.
He threw me on the bed, pinned me using his forearm across my throat, ripped off my underwear, I would have been wearing a dress, and raped me, with me fighting as hard as I could. And I'm 5'11", but he's strong, and he was practiced at it. It was full-on, fast, brutal, physical rape.
Casey Allen says she told close friends what happened, but not her parents, afraid of what they might do.
Wearing Nygard clothing.
Like Casey Allen, April Telek of Vancouver says she also can't forget an experience with Nygard in Winnipeg. It was 1993. She was 20. He was in his 50s.
That invitation to Winnipeg was a huge turning point in my life. It impacted me in more ways than I thought it could or would. It changed my life forever.
She was representing Canada in international beauty pageants when Peter Nygard called with what seemed a generous business proposition.
He said he thought that I would be great as the model for his signature line and that I should come to Winnipeg.
So in November 1993, she arrived in Winnipeg with high hopes.
I was very excited to be with a Canadian designer in Winnipeg doing what I thought was going to be a really exciting next chapter
in my career, in my life.
Picked up at the airport, she was driven to the company warehouse containing Nygard's apartment.
And he showed me around, and I said, "Where am I staying?" And he said, "Here." And it turned out it was with him. And he said, "Well, what did you think was going to happen?" And I said, I thought I was coming for work. It was pretty obvious to me at that point that he was expecting more. And I said, "I am not going to sleep with you tonight. I will not sleep with you tomorrow. That is never going to happen."
She says Nygard wouldn't take no for an answer.
I was terrified of him. But I turned away and tried to crawl over the couch away from him, and he flipped me around and obviously wanted to have sex with me, and I was fighting, saying no. And then I just lay there and let it happen.
April Tulloch says Peter Nygard held her against her will for 2 or 3 days, until finally she managed to escape while he was asleep. She phoned a friend to pick her up. When she called her parents in Vancouver, they'd already reported her missing to the RCMP. They sent the Winnipeg police to check on her, but she says she was too afraid to talk about what happened. In the end, she told her family and the Mounties that she was kept against her will, but took her parents' advice not to press charges.
Nygard said at one point, "I will ruin you." And I believe that to be true, and I was scared of that, but I was scared of my life. I was scared of all of it, and I was scared of retribution.
It was hard, but I took life as it came, you know. People always describe me as the human version of Tigger. I just bounced through life, and I've always got this silly little grin and a joke ready, you know, and that's just who I am.
Like April Tulloch, Serena Hicks was 20 years old in the early 90s when she first encountered Nygard. A new mom, she had a part-time job at a Nygard store in downtown Winnipeg. She says she was working late with her manager one night when Nygard showed up.
And she said, "Hey, you know, can you just go clean out the change rooms?" And she said, "We're just gonna talk really quickly." You know, I opened, you know, each change room, and the handicap one was like, "Oh gosh, you know, can't people just put things on the hangers?" And then I was in there, and then he was behind me. Peter Nygard was behind me. And
Serena Hicks says when Peter Nygard raped her in the change room, she feared for her life.
you know, I thought about this gorgeous little baby who I was providing. And I thought, God, Mom's not coming home. I don't remember leaving, and I thought, I can't believe I am alive. How am I alive? And then when I got out, I realized that I was full of bruises and marks where I fed my baby. Never breastfed him again.
Confused and distraught, she says her life began to fall apart. She quit her job and left her husband, but didn't tell anyone then about the rape.
I lost every joy, every happiness.
Nadine Mustos was even younger, barely a teen, when she first encountered Nygard on the streets of Winnipeg.
He pulled up in his Jaguar, his black Jaguar,
with his infamous leather jacket, blue jeans, cowboy boots, and a white button-up. And I remember that. And I didn't know who he was because I was a child.
She had already been trafficked on the infamous Winnipeg strip known as Kitty Track, when she says Nygard picked her up at least twice when she was still 13 or 14.
Second time he picked me up, he drove me to his compound. We went inside the compound, the warehouse part, and he locked the door behind us. And I was thinking, oh my God, he's gonna do something to me. Like my instincts just like heightened, and I was like, okay, we'll just do what he wants me to do and it'll be fine.
She says Nygard forced her to take cocaine, then sexually assaulted her.
Fear kicked in when he gave me that drug so bad. And after he was done, I didn't say anything. I was like so fucked up from him shoving that shit up my nose.
According to Nadine Mustos, it took years to come to terms with her sexual exploitation as a child.
When this Nygard hit the media, and then it dawned on me like, oh my God, this guy's he's a predator, he's a pervert. He picked me up when I was a little girl.
Nadine, Serena, April, Casey, all took their stories to the Winnipeg Police Service in the past year. Each described being raped by Peter Nygard. None of their cases have ever gone to court. When we come back, why have Winnipeg police and Manitoba prosecutors been so helpless to make a case against Peter Nygard? It is 2018. Peter Nygard and Winnipeg are celebrating the 50th anniversary of his fashion empire. The city is festooned with suspiciously youthful pictures of Nygard, the man and the municipality inextricably linked.
This is a lady who has been a friend and I would say a family member of the Nygard family. An absolutely wonderful lady, Pearl McGonigal.
Manitoba's former lieutenant governor joins the province's movers and shakers to mark Nygard's half-century as a Winnipeg kingpin.
The thing is that I don't think I know. Bothers me the most right now is that society thinks, oh, Peter Nygard perfected everything in the Bahamas. No, he perfected how to get away with all of this in Winnipeg.
His predatory parties may have got their start in the Bahamas in the 1980s, but by then there had been whispers and rumors of women and girls sexually assaulted by Nygard in Winnipeg for years already. Joy Smith is a former Conservative Member of Parliament from Winnipeg, who now runs an anti-human trafficking foundation.
Well, I had a particular incident where one of the staff members who worked for Nygard at the time told me about a young girl who had been raped, and the family didn't know where to turn. And so I met with the girl and the family.
That alleged victim was only 14. Like others, her case would never get to court.
And as it turned out, Peter Nygard persuaded them not to go to the police and not to report, and he gave them $250,000 to keep quiet. And you know, I could never understand initially why they would agree to that. But as they explained to me, Peter Nygard made them feel that they couldn't win anything anyway. He had the money and he'd fight them and their lives would be, you know, ruined. He was in full power mode. He was the king. He could do anything he wanted. So the family, sadly and reluctantly, did accept the money and kept quiet.
There are recurring themes in the Nygard saga in Winnipeg: money, power, and the enablers they attract.
You couldn't pay me enough money to go to a gala celebrating Peter Nygard. I would never do that. I think that it's a testament to the disregard of women's experience and women coming forward with their truth.
After Nygard's arrest on the U.S. criminal charges, NDP MLA Nahanni Fontaine called out the provincial justice minister for giving Nygard preferential treatment while awaiting extradition in a Winnipeg jail.
Peter Nygard has been given accommodations that no other Manitoban in a provincial correctional facility has been given. He has a phone in his cell that he has access to for 16 hours a day, a TV, a chair, 2 mattresses, and a special diet, Madam Speaker. Will the minister tell us today why Mr. Nygard is getting special treatment?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I thank the member for the question. Mr. Nygard is getting no special treatment from Manitoba Corrections.
More trouble for Canadian fashion designer Peter Nygard. Toronto police have now charged him with multiple counts of sexual assault.
Is the Canadian charge.
But on the same day in October, when Peter Nygard consented to U.S. extradition, it was publicly announced he'd been charged in Toronto with multiple counts of sexual assault involving 5 women and 1 girl. In Winnipeg, after decades, still nothing.
To learn that the Toronto police and court system found 6 victims in Toronto to be more credible and charge-worthy than the 8 Winnipeg victims is a disgrace.
Remember, Casey Allen was 17 when she told friends she'd been raped by Nygard. 40 years later, she says Manitoba prosecutors refused her case, explaining they only want what they think they can win. Then she learned about the Toronto charges.
I could see the flaws in my case perfectly well, but this morning when I learned that 6 women in Toronto were having their claims taken to court, whereas we weren't, I did have some questions for the Crown. What is so top secret that the prosecutors in Manitoba can't stand up and answer some questions? They're not hurting the feelings of us 8 victims by saying, look, the cases were flawed, we step aside because we thought the Southern District. I don't care what the Crown had to say, but no comment is just an insult. It's a slap in the face.
I'm a social worker, so I knew the second that I got the call to meet at Victim Services. I'd worked for Victim Services in other communities and cities, and I was like, oh, this is bad news. The weird thing is that even though I knew the second I gave my statement, nothing was gonna happen.
Serena Hicks says the Crown told her she wouldn't be a good witness because she's a complainant in the class action lawsuit.
I was pretty mad. I kind of leaned in a little bit and I said, do you think we're actually ever going to see a dime? I said, because you're wrong. I said, the only thing that is going to do is help us feel empowered.
Nadine Mustos was barely a teenager when it all began for her. She was over 40 when prosecutors rejected her case.
I broke down and I told the Crown attorney, I said, you know what? I was like, I feel like I need to become a cop. I need to become a cop for me. I said, I feel like I need to do my own investigation. And I was like, I gave you guys everything. I told you how it looked inside, the car that he drove, what he was wearing, and what happened. I said, that should be clarification enough. They said, we need concrete evidence. We can't go by historical, because it's historical. And then they said one significant point is because I didn't know who he was at the time. But now I know who he is, and now I'm saying something, so they have a contradiction right there. And I'm like, wow, this is reconciliation. You know, this is the most prolific fucking predator in Canada. And because I didn't know who he was as a child, and that just broke my heart, man. It gave me no faith in the justice system. Like, this city holds a lot of fucking secrets, and a lot of men in this city have done it to women for years. Indigenous girls, Indigenous women. And they've gotten away, and this is another way that the justice system is just letting it fucking get away with it.
According to April Telek, the Crown said her case came down to her word against Nygard's.
I was contacted by the Crown, and I was told that at that time they were not going to move forward with criminal charges against Nygard on my behalf. And I was gutted by that news. So then, you hear those words, no, we're not going to move forward. And then I had to ask them, how can you make that decision? And I was mad. I was really mad, actually.
That's exactly what we wanted to know. Given all of the allegations of sexual offenses against Peter Nygard, how exactly did the Winnipeg police and Manitoba prosecutors make the decision whether or not to charge Peter Nygard criminally? The Manitoba Prosecution Office declined our request for an interview. But in their written response to the Fifth Estate, Winnipeg police did disclose for the first time that, quote, after review, the Crown declined to authorize criminal charges against Mr. Nygard on any of the 8 cases that were referred to them. From her backyard office in Toronto, therapist Shannon Moroney continues to counsel dozens of Nygard's alleged victims.
The survivors that I'm working with, I try to encourage them to remember that they are part of a sisterhood, and that a charge for one is a charge for everybody, philosophically and emotionally.
Okay, well, Mr. Nygard denies any allegations of criminal conduct.
Peter Nygard continues to deny it all. Late in October, he was transferred from Winnipeg to Toronto to face the sexual assault charges. His latest bail hearing has been held over until the middle of December. 80 years old, he's still waiting to go to trial. Meanwhile, in the Bahamas, Nygard Key is quiet, abandoned. The Nygard clothing companies are in receivership in Canada. And this past fall, a fire ripped through Nygard's former showroom next to the warehouse where he kept his now notorious apartment. It seems that in Winnipeg, the stain of Peter Nygard's past may be erased before he is ever brought to justice here. If you want to learn more about this story, check out the Evil by Design podcast. Fifth Estate producer Timothy Sawa hosts a series that goes even deeper into the allegations against Peter Nygard. Evil by Design is available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.